Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I hope your Turkey Day went well. And with that, we will admit some lethargy. I don't know how you say it, Brian. Anyway, so
lethargy
we're going to
sounds right, yeah.
talk some NBA, but then I also just have some random off-the-cuff subjects because it turns out we didn't do as much prep, and by we I mean me, going into this week because of travel, family, all that jazz for Thanksgiving. So anyway, I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, known as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Brian, Steph Curry or Kevin Durant?
Oh, man. Come on, you know I follow Warriors Twitter, Dre. Steph better all the time if you put a gun to my head. However, considering we're heading into free agency for Kevin Durant, and I know he listens to this podcast, I'm going to backstab Steph Curry and say, KD, you're the best. We need you back. So there's my homer answer.
Whereas when I sat back down, I hope I didn't get myself off center, Brian, but whatever. Okay, so we're going to go, we're going to do Last Week on Lost. We're going to do some Around the NBA, and then we're going to talk chess and the movie Creed 2, because I know those are the most pertinent NBA topics. All right, so Last Week on Lost, as I've noted, we because we've been doing more regular content, we've been getting some engagement, although last week I did not get the show notes up in time for the podcast before I left for vacation. I may put some up this week. We did, of course, get the podcast and the YouTube up. So if you don't follow our YouTube channel, our Twitch channel, or our iTunes stream, the Boxscore Geeks, you missed out. But we do have those up. But we did get a few comments last week on the actual top 5 box scores of the week. And I want to apologize to a snub because multiple people mentioned this. So Jay Gunter, Brett, and I believe TGT, actually not TGT, we'll look up Brian, I'll try and get the right name. But 2 people mentioned this Anthony Davis box score line where he had a 5x5 game on November 21st. It was actually 5th on the list for my top 5 box scores of the week. And then you know what I couldn't do? I could not dump Kyle Lowry's triple-double. So last week's top 5 box, or this week's top 5 box scores of the week, which happened from last week, were, of course, Giannis, who put up the best game of the week and a thumping of the Portland Trailblazers, Kyle Lowry's triple-double, which was the second best game of the week, Hamidou Diallo, who got the rookie spot, as well as just amazing in 22 minutes, just put a perfect shooting performance, which is great. James Harden, he'll probably be on the list again this week too, Brian. He got the auspicious bad triple-double, the 5 points, 10 assists, 10 turnovers. But he just put up a 54-point game. But last week he had the most efficient volume shooting game of the week. And then Enes Kanter had a 20-20. So I've noted that from last year I used to do 10 box scores of the week and then would kind of intermingle interesting, good, bad, box scores. This year I basically do 5 good, 3 bad. And so that actually makes it a lot harder for me. And I was in a tough decision, and I couldn't let Anthony Davis's 5x5 trump any of those games. I just couldn't let him go. And of course it wasn't a bad game. But yeah, both Jay Brett noticed that last week, and then Jay Feindling noticed that this week. So sorry, Anthony Davis. And as we even said pre-show and then on the show at the very beginning, because of Thanksgiving, I did not do as much prep at the end of last week and the beginning of this week. So that is why he didn't get an honorable mention. It was actually on the back of my head when I was writing the article, and I just didn't get around to it. Okay, no comments. Brian does not care that Anthony Davis, one of the greatest players in the NBA, is snubbed.
All right, I'll ask you a question. How about this, Dre? When you were considering his 5x5, did you look at all how common of a thing that is? Was that like a really rare thing, even if it wasn't as impactful as some of these other games?
5x5s are pretty rare. And I mean, for those that don't know, this is a fun one. I'll see if I can narrate it to you, Brian. One of the things that we regret that at the moment we don't currently have is we do not have the ability to like share driving of the main display monitor, so to speak, on the podcast when we're doing it live, when we're doing it on Twitch, and then of course YouTube if you watch it there. But you can do, you go to Basketball Reference, the Play Index tool, you are able to search for single games that match a certain criteria. And so of course what we can do is if we go there, you can look for rebounds over 5, blocks over 5. What's the full 5x5? It's blocks, assists, points, rebounds.
That sounds right. I think you can get it with anything though. Anything good.
This has to be boring, but you can go over there as long as on the seasons you click any to any. You can do that. I guess the easiest part, I mean, the annoying part of a 5x5 is, of course, the fact that it can occur pretty easily. But okay, so I guess this is fair. So I just looked at the 5x5, which is blocks over 5, assists over 5, rebounds over 5, steals over 5, and it turns out that is an incredibly hard thing to do. It has only happened 18 times in the last couple, or actually 17 times. And then, of course, I don't know if you recall this, Draymond Green just missed a quadruple double. He got a triple double without points. So he missed a quadruple double without points. He missed a 5x5 as well on points. He only got 4 points. So, that's an interesting one, Brian, where it is actually pretty rare. Maybe it should have made the list. I think I might have snubbed Anthony Davis. So apologies there, Anthony Davis. You joined some auspicious company, including Marcus Camby, Draymond Green, as I noticed, and then Hakeem Olajuwon is the king of this with 6.
Wow. He was good.
All right, so then I also want to give a no prize thank you. For those that remember, last week we talked about Stanley, or 2 weeks ago we talked about Stanley. And this was something common at Marvel. If you found a mistake in an article, they'd send you a no prize, which was like, thank you, and then you didn't actually get a prize. But TGT noticed that for like 3 weeks now, Brian, I'm going to have to go back and fix it. I've been copying and pasting a template for the top 5 box scores of the week, and then I have a leaderboard section. And the first time I posted the leaderboard, nobody had done enough to make the leaderboard. So I said, since no player made either list this week, I'm done. There's currently not much point. We'll see you next week. I have had that on there for multiple weeks now. TGT noticed it. So, as he noticed, it was a negative editing over par. I agree. So thank you for pointing that out. Let's get on to what we call our segment Around the NBA, where you and I basically discuss just various things around the NBA that we have in mind that might be a shorter topic. And we're going to do it. We're going to do something live because this is boggling my mind as well. And there was also a user comment from last week.
Yeah, it's both categories at once, Dre. User comment and an Around the NBA. This is a great topic. We
did that a few weeks ago, too, with the Milwaukee Bucks. So DG22 said, someone please explain the Grizz to me. And so we're doing this live. I'm actually going to go to the Boxscore Geeks. I'm going to look at the Memphis Grizzlies because the West is in such turmoil right now, which really boils down to the Houston Rockets were stupid in who they picked up in the offseason. Michael Carter-Williams and Carmelo Anthony were foolish moves. I looked this up, so this was funny, Brian. I was bashing Carmelo Anthony on Twitter this week, and someone said he's not the reason they're losing. I looked it up, and despite the fact that he did just have a really good game, the real harm on this team is Eric Gordon, who is a player we hated years ago. So the funny thing about this team is basically they were top heavy enough to basically get away with some bad players, which was kind of the MO of Carmelo Anthony throughout his entire career until he passed his prime. Essentially with the Nuggets, you had Marcus Camby, Andre Miller, and Nene when he was healthy. And with the Knicks, you had Tyson Chandler, Jason Kidd, some young upstarts like Jeremy Lin and Landry Fields that, were able to propel him. And then it was eventually too much. The same is kind of true with Eric Gordon on the Houston Rockets, where he is really an anchor on that team. But, Chris Paul, James Harden back when they had him, Dwight Howard were enough, but it's finally starting to weigh him down. So the Rockets are struggling. The Golden State Warriors, thanks to injury, suspension, all that, have hurt a little. So the West is kind of just all over the place, and the teams at the top of the West right now are the Clippers and the Memphis Grizzlies. Let's talk about the Memphis Grizzlies now.
So do you want to go to Basketball Reference first, Dre, before we go to Boxscore Geeks to get a more high-level view?
Yeah, let's do both. And actually, one thing I know that you are a fan of doing is looking at their Pythagorean wins.
You know what I'm going. You know where I'm going.
And so for those that don't quite know how this works, Basketball Reference has a simple rating system, and there are two components to that. There is point margin, how many points my team outscores the opponent per 100 possession, and then there's strength of schedule. What is the quality of opponent I have faced? And so, as an example, out west, the best team right now, according to that measure, is the Denver Nuggets, because when you factor in their competition and how well they've done, they are currently the best team out west. And for what it's worth, we haven't talked much of this, Brian. The Denver Nuggets, after an amazing start, kind of struggled, I put in quotes, but what frustrated me about the struggling is if you looked at the teams they lost to like the Pelicans that were almost healthy again. They lost to the Rockets right after they got rid of Carmelo Anthony and still had Chris Paul and James Harden. They lost to the Milwaukee Bucks. I almost said Brewers, but the Milwaukee Bucks twice. And that team is the, best thing since sliced bread out east right now. So it's like they lost to some good teams. So I don't get frustrated when a good team loses some close games to other good teams. And that's the point here. So if we actually examine the Memphis Grizzlies, though, what it looks like is they're close to it, though. They're an 11-8 team as opposed to their 12-7 record. So that still is pretty good.
Although one thing I'll point out, Dre, to give DG22 some credit and cover here, it looks like I got rid of the link, but he posted that over a week ago, and I think Memphis has kind of gone downhill since he posted that. And here's what I mean by bringing that up. They were probably weaker than their Pythagorean indicated, and now they're coming back to it in the past week since they only had 4 losses or whatever it was a week ago.
They lost to the Clippers, which is completely reasonable, right? The Clippers are a very good team. But then as to what you're saying, they just lost to the New York Knicks, who are a very bad team. But if you recall, there was a box score from that game that I really loved. Enes Kanter got 21 points, 26 rebounds, and then I think Tim Hardaway – this is a funny one. I remember the coach was complimenting it, but that's actually okay. I forget threes. It's misleading when you see 6 for 16, but then 22 points on 6 for 16 isn't bad. And then Emmanuel Mudiay, who is this player, single-handedly kept the Nuggets out of the playoffs 2 seasons. I mean, it's super frustrating to look at it that way, but candidly, a replacement level player, which would be a wins per 48 of like 0, meaning they do. They're ostensibly they do nothing on the court. That's better. He was hurting us. He was taking bad shots. So Emmanuel Mudiay put up one of the best games of his career, which isn't saying much because he's not a good player. Tim Hardaway had a good game. Enes Kanter actually got minutes. We were talking with Art Rondeau last week about the Kings, and this is always a hard part for us when you have a good underrated player on a bad team. And the team kind of goes, hey, coach, we'd really prefer you play these young players we drafted over these established veterans that are quite good. But Enes Kanter got minutes. So that one to me is misleading because the Knicks are a bad team. But then you have a rare thing happen, which is Enes Kanter actually got a lot of minutes in play because for perspective, he's averaging 27.2 minutes a game this season. And he has not averaged over 30 minutes a game except for one season in Oklahoma City. So this is a player that should get more play. We say he should, but he doesn't. So I wouldn't say they've necessarily gone downhill a ton in those 2 losses, but it still does remain to be seen how good they are. And the reason is I'm talking about doing it live. If we go to their Boxscore Geeks page, the more important one that'll have some advanced
Just one last thing, Dre, before we go there. They are doing it with defense. They are 3rd in the league in defense, but their offense is really bad. They're down at 25th in offense. So that's what that's what I would look at anyway. Right before I went to the players.
It's funny when you're talking that because I was about to bring that point up in a roundabout way, which is when we look at their players. The thing about this team is it seems apparent from historical precedent, which we kind of note is a silly way of phrasing things. I'll get off on my slightly political tangent for the day, Brian, which I like to do on the show every time I can. I kind of hate the predicting U.S. elections, especially the president. I saw Nate Silver Nate Silver made some tweet like usually the incumbent president wins, right? Talking about how hard it is to predict the upcoming election. Because what he was basically saying is if we looked at the voters, how they voted in the midterm, and we expect some similarity in the 2020 election for president, it gets really interesting because Trump doesn't have enough support. But then if we look at historical precedent, normally the incumbent president gets reelected. But let's see, you're better at politics than me.
I haven't thought about this already, but go ahead and finish up.
There's 44 presidents total and 50 some odd elections, right? I'm trying to remember. I was looking up the Wikipedia article.
Yeah, Trump is the 45th president, but there's been obviously several repeaters. So
yeah, but what I was going to ask is how many elections have there been? Because that's where. Okay, so let's see. That's annoying. It says ranking presidents, but it doesn't give me the election. But I think it's 50 something, right? Because there have been,
right.
Roosevelt had 3 terms. Lots of presidents have had 2. Cleveland, of course, did. Not at the same time. But to the point that's a very small sample size. And not the United States, the NBA championship is very much the same way. Where first off, I usually cut it off at 1980 as the modern NBA. Because that's when we got the 3-point line, which is a major rule distinction, as well as that's post-merger. So there was a period of time in NBA history where we had like no teams. We had 8 to 12 teams. That's nothing. Then there was this period in the 70s where we had the ABA, so all of the talent wasn't consolidated. The 80s was when all the leagues were consolidated and we finally got close enough to the modern rules such that we've really only had almost 40 NBA championships. And then additionally, the rules of the playoffs have changed up multiple times. Because if we're honestly candid with ourselves, I forget it's early 2000s is when they actually added the best of 7 first round, which changes up things dramatically. So I'll just point out that, the number of NBA titles we've had, if we're talking modern rule scheme, is under 20. So when you're trying to say this is required to win, it can get very silly when I go, it takes one outlier of only 5%, and that, there's no P test or T test or any statistical test there that we have a sufficient enough sample size to say it. Relating it to presidents, whenever I see Nate Silver say stuff, and I don't mind it, that's what he's supposed to do and has to do. The problem he has to do, and I'm trying to do this ourselves, is to just say that doesn't really mean anything. So I'm saying based on historical precedent, and then immediately undercutting myself and saying that doesn't mean this can't work. But based on historical precedent, to get back to that, the Memphis Grizzlies do not look like a typical top of the division team in that they don't have any star players by either metric. So the two metrics we use around here are the Brian Star and the Dre Star. Brian Star is 200 wins per 48, which is usually about a plus 3 points over par. It means that player in a 100-possession game against a neutral opponent with all-average teammates against an all-average team, you would expect that team to win by 3 points a game, which is quite good. Championship teams usually tend to be around +5 at least. The really, really good ones like the Warriors, the Warrior Dynasty recently, closer to +10. So somewhere in that, and it doesn't take hard math to realize that means you need multiple stars or multiple really, really good players. So that's usually required. At Brian Star, 200 wins per 48. Dre Star, 10 wins produced in a season, 82-game season. And the only reason for that is to basically say you need a star with endurance. Because certainly we've seen star players, even like Steve Nash is a great example of this, doesn't necessarily play full throttle minutes, and then in the playoffs doesn't necessarily play as much. So that kind of thing. You need a player that's going to give you enough minutes in the regular season to make you a high seed, and then you need them good enough in the playoffs to compete with other top rotations to take you to the finals. The Grizzlies don't look like that at all, in that their best player per minute that actually is getting minutes is Omri Caspi. And first off, good on Omri Caspi. This is a player that's been kind of interesting. Ironically, we say he's a really good player as a power forward. In the past, we've actually said he's been played out of position as a power forward, but he's playing really well. But he is only a points over par of +2.3.
And he's barely in the rotation, Dre. Let's count here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11th on their team in minutes. So
11th, only 13 games. Then you've got Marc Gasol, who is ancient and has been good in the past, but nowhere close to a star player. Then we've got Shelvin Mack, who is just decent. Mike Conley, one of the highest paid players in the NBA, just decent. And then that's
Kyle Anderson, kind of a letdown too, right? He was better. He's been average, but I thought that he would have to do really well for the Grizzlies to go anywhere, and he's not.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, according to our numbers, he's playing stretch. Like between he's listed as a power forward. He's listed as a small forward. Our position algorithm seems to think he's somewhere in between, just because of his height and weight. But his production numbers are the worst they have been since he was a rookie. So yeah, kind of so far. That's the interesting part. Kind of a letdown from the box score standpoint, but this team is doing amazing on defense. So we don't typically see this, because even the really good defensive squads, like the key examples you might get are the Miami Heat squads back in the day with Pat Riley, the New York Knicks squads back in the day with Pat Riley as well, the Detroit Pistons that actually went on to win a title. That's one of the biggest myths about that squad. The Detroit Pistons that won the 2004 title, everybody says they were a defensive-minded squad that didn't have a star. Ben Wallace was amazing. Ben Wallace was an all-star, an all-defensive player, an all-NBA player, a wins-produced star. So they had a star by that metric. The current Memphis Grizzlies do not. And they don't really have any standout individual players. A few years ago, I'm trying to remember who on, like, it was some rookie. It was like Kyle Green or whatever. I can't even remember the name. That's how both long ago it was and annoying. The Memphis Grizzlies overperformed. They just had this really hot start. And basically, I seem to recall this player was an average. It was JaMychal Green.
Yeah, he's still there and not playing very well this year.
what happened was he was like an average player, but he just had these clutch games where he played like a star, and then he didn't have any games that cost you. Because what we've had sometimes with kind of what I just described, the clutch player that's a star, this is like the LaMarcus Aldridge principle. You have a player like LaMarcus Aldridge that puts up, say, a 40-20. And that wins the game, and there's no question. LaMarcus Aldridge won that game for the it'd be Portland Trailblazers back in the day. Portland Trailblazers over the Spurs. Key win. But then he'd put up some game where he'd shoot, 2 for 15 and only get 5 rebounds, and you go, he cost them the game. JaMychal Green was close to average in their losses, and then a star in major wins. And, basically they won 4 or 5 games they really shouldn't because of that. There is really no standout thing like that this season on the Grizzlies. They are just playing lockdown defense. And I kind of want to go, and so that's funny because you were talking Boxscore Geeks versus Basketball Reference. We said we were going to do it live, Brian, so this is the fun part. If you go over to opponent stats, I believe one thing they're just doing really well is both containing their opponent's shooting as well, three-point shooting, and as well as how often. So actually... Do
you want opponent per 100?
Let's do opponent per 100. So actually, they are completely average. Their opponents are shooting completely average from 3, but they are attempting 29.3. And yeah, if we go per 100, it might be a little better because I know another thing the Memphis Grizzlies do are playing a ridiculously slow pace, which is actually kind of odd because the logic says, this is in basketball on paper, if you play slow pace, that usually favors the better or the worst team, because it lowers the sample size, which ups the variance, right? If 3-3-pointers can win me the game, then you having more possessions means I need more shots at those 3-pointers, right? If I have 120 possession games, you might need 4 or 5 made threes to close the difference, whereas if I play a 90 possession game. So the Grizzlies are playing really slow despite being a superior team. They're basically just doing a grind out defense, and the only kind of worry I have about this is they're an older team. Mike Conley and Marc Gasol have been beat up in the past. You're mentioning this. Omri Casriot, who's one of their best players, isn't even playing a ton now. I just don't know if this squad can last to the playoffs to still be on top once they get there. And then as soon as they get to the playoffs, I question if their defense can hold up in that their rotation isn't that great. And other teams now we're going to have Kevin Durant getting 40 minutes a night instead of 33 or 34.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. I think that the answer to the original question is that it's kind of a mirage, right? They're going to have to keep playing this really good defense. Marc Gasol and Mike Conley are going to have to stay healthy. And Mike Conley's probably going to have to get better. He's not played like his normal self. Marc Gasol is going to have to remain better than he normally is, which he is right now. And they're probably going to have to get Kyle Anderson, and someone else, probably JaMychal Green, who's been better in the past, right? So all those guys are going to have to play better. Like, all that stuff's going to have to happen for them to really go somewhere. It doesn't seem likely to me. There's just not a lot else there on that team. It's not a great roster.
One interesting thing I want to bring up too that makes like this strategy and kind of what we were just saying a little more interesting in the modern NBA, and I'll get another throw out as a result. If you go to Boxscore Geeks, or not Boxscore Geeks, sorry. If you go to Basketball Reference, they have season stats. So if you do the hover over on seasons, there's a summary, and you can do stats per game. And so that'll give you an amalgamation of every single player. And one of the things I just did there is I just sorted by minutes per game. Now this is a hilarious one. Currently in the NBA, the leader in minutes per game is Anthony Davis. So Anthony Davis, 37.4 minutes per game. Now, if we go back, I went back to 2009. I'm going to do this twice. So I'm going to do 2009 and then 1999. Actually, I'm going to do 1998 because 1999 was the lockout shortened season, and that gets very weird. In 1999, Andre Iguodala led the league at almost 40 minutes a game. And in terms of number of players that trumped what I just said, Anthony Davis, there were 20 players at 37.4 minutes or above in the 2009 season. And then if I go back to, I'm just curious for this. Again, this is a live segment, so this is a lot of fun, Brian. This is what we would be doing if you were watching me like research a topic or you see something on Twitter. Yeah, if we go back to 1998, this is remarkable. There were 7 players in 1998 at 40 minutes per game or above. And then I just said 37.4. Was this right? That gets us down to 30, and that was Karl Malone at age 34. So Karl Malone twilight of his career, is playing as many minutes per game as Anthony Davis, arguably the modern day Karl Malone, right? Top big in the NBA. So this grind out strategy we just mentioned it flows a little with the modern NBA in that you can get away with a grind out defense against some teams because they're not playing their stars as much. It will fall on its face in the playoffs. Actually, I do want to look at the playoff numbers. I'm not going to do it in the show. I'll do that as either a question for the audience. You can look it up yourself, consider it homework, or we may address it at a future point. No promises, though. A funny note on that, too, by the way, I got to throw a little shade, or at least do a clap to a little shade. So American Numbers, Arturo on Twitter, notice.
Memes are complicated, Drake. Clapping to shade, but I follow you.
Okay, thanks. But American Numbers, Arturo on Twitter, noted a tweet from Nate Silver where Nate Silver said, hey, by the way, for our NBA projections, we are changing the model to include the fact that playoff rotations are different than regular season rotations. So when you are trying to say, what are the odds of this team winning a title, exactly what we're saying. I'm guessing it was the same stuff. The fact that the Los Angeles Clippers and the Memphis Grizzlies are at the top, you go, well, their SRS or their point margin says they should be a good chance, but there's no way in hell I think this team's going to compete against the Rockets. And the obvious solution is to compare the regular season numbers versus the playoff rotations. Arturo, that was one of his very early articles. I quote it all the time I think he called it Arturo's Silly Little Stats was the blog title back in the day. Yep. But that was one of his first things. So, I think I joked to him. I said, I'm looking forward to Nate Silver catching up with 2011 you. But this, what we're saying right here about the Memphis Grizzlies is they have a strategy that is built for the modern NBA, which is playing your stars fewer minutes to make them playoff ready. Really, really tough, grind down, slow pace defense. And that has them as a good team. We are questioning if that can keep up even for a full regular season, right? It's only been 20 games, let alone take you into the playoffs. But at least that's what's going on. We've answered it. Tough grind down defense that is among the best in the NBA, which, to be fair, a funny point about this is, on the one hand, I can say I don't see this as success for the playoffs. On the other hand, if you don't have any stars and you don't have a real shot of getting a star, because don't forget the Memphis Grizzlies are completely hamstrung by the amount of money they're giving Mike Conley and Marc Gasol. I believe that's 60% of their salary cap, if I'm not mistaken. I'll check Spotrac in just a second.
Yeah, I mean, all they can hope, I think, is that Conley becomes a star for like one or two playoff series again. Like he returns, because sometimes older players are able to do that, right? That used to be really good. But yeah, I agree with you for the most part.
Throw or just mainstream kind of note on that. The belief is, like Dwayne Wade, looks better in the playoffs because they stopped doing drug testing. And then also, a lot of perspective, the playoffs, you have more rest between games. You're able to scout your opponent. So it might be easier for an older player to be conditioned and then to watch game film and know exactly what they're going into. Whereas an older player might have a tough time. They're on the road, so they can't study game film every night. They're beaten up. They don't have access to drugs. But yeah.
And also, Dre, it's just one thing about like the kind of the reality of pro sports. And, I especially think about other kind of stuff too, like competitive fighting especially. But then versus, what people say in the media. And what I'm talking about is the amount of energy and effort you can put out. If you talk to a coach in the media, they'll say, oh, we have to give 110% all the time, every game. But physically, that's impossible, right? You can't exert yourself to the maximum all the time. So you do have to pick your spots.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I think
and older players can do that. That's all.
And it can also, older players, it can be boring. You've seen all this before, so that you might not have the same excitement level as younger players. So there are a ton of reasons, not conspiracy theory laden, but we'll see. I'm excited to check this out. But it was funny. An article I wrote preseason where we were predicting teams, and then I even said this ahead of time, so I was right. I was like, you get to tear these up almost immediately. Everything I'm saying in this article predicting the NBA regular season is just a futile waste of time. I had a very nihilistic approach because it's true, right? Like Chris Paul gets injured immediately, like Draymond Green gets in trouble and they're feuding. All sorts of fun stuff happens immediately, so I can go, I have no idea. But I said, the Memphis Grizzlies, the under seems so easy, but I'm really worried because they always burn us, and they're doing it again. It is just.
Do you remember that number off the top of your head?
I don't. It had to have been 40s or 30s, right?
I think they could still get there.
No, they easily. I think they're going to. Oh, you think they could get the under?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, to be fair, if they're playing tough grind down defense, and that does have to probably rely on Mike Conley and Marc Gasol, if they both get injured, and we just pointed out their team outside of their top 4 honestly looks terrible. So and then what we've also kind of thought about defense is a team thing where you can have a weakness at D. I always hate this. Melo doesn't play D, Kyrie doesn't play D, Steph doesn't play D, all that jazz, because I think it is very possible for a believed subpar defensive player to play on a top defense in the NBA, because the right way to play defense is at a team level. And you have to. It's almost, that is like the only part of basketball that is really as close to, say, football as any other sport. Because on offense, right, one player, Steph Curry, can just hold the ball and say, if you leave me open, I'm just going to shoot it from 35 feet. If you don't leave me open and you close on me, I get to decide who to pass to. And it's not predetermined, right? It's not necessarily the fact that Steph Curry decided to play ahead of time like football or had multiple routes. And in fact, I did you say this to me, Brian, that we've looked at so much stuff on the Warriors, but the point I've heard is the Warriors don't know what they're going to do, which makes them hard to guard, because if they don't know what they're going to do, their opponents can't really read them and try and determine it. But that's the point. Good defenses in the NBA require a team level of cohesion working together, because it doesn't matter if you have Kawhi as the best defensive perimeter player in the NBA. If he defends his guy really well and the person guarding the person in the post doesn't guard their person well, then all the person that Kawhi is guarding has to do is toss the ball over their head to the person in the post, and they score easily. Did not matter a lick that Kawhi looked really good at defense. So,
yeah, and we've always been suspicious of individual defense that you can't track with stats, right? Obviously, stuff like rebounds, steals, and blocks are really important and are worth the whole possession. But just the kind of unknown keeping your guy in front of you as an individual defender that coaches will talk about, we have a tougher time with that because you can't quantify it, right? And maybe internal teams have that, but who knows? But then team defense, on the other hand, it's been talked about in Wages of Wins and many other places. That's very important.
I have to give a huge shout out to his Ty Willingham's. I miss his blog. I forget what it's called. Back in the day, used to blog about the Bucks a lot, but he talked about this where he would look at that, where it did really seem like coach plus team scheme mattered a hell of a lot for year-to-year consistency for defense. And then we've even noticed another weird thing happen that might happen to the Grizzlies. The Milwaukee Bucks briefly had this great defense under Jason Kidd that was then very quickly torn apart when other teams learned what they were doing. So it's like you got to shock them with this very tough, hard-to-run defense for about half of a season, and then the NBA figured it out, and Jason Kidd's like, keep running it. And it's a very game theory thing.
No, that's my question here about them is to the coaching and scouting types out there, is are they doing anything innovative at all, to do this well with these older, less talented players? I'd be interested to know.
I will shoot out a tweet at some point this week to Coach Nick to ask him, because I clearly have not watched the Memphis Grizzlies at all this season, and I don't feel bad about that. But
here's one guess, Dre. This core of players has been together for a while. So, I don't know, chemistry on defense, do they have their own system that they've been running?
I
don't know.
One of our topics is Steph Curry versus Kevin Durant. I'll move us on in just a second. And we were saying that, like, you hate this, does a star gel? It was because I mentioned Jimmy Butler right before the show started.
Yeah.
I was like, shocker, Jimmy Butler is still one of the top 50 players in the league. And you were like, amazing, chemistry doesn't seem to matter. And we agree with that. Defense is an area where chemistry might matter. I'm going to actually, let's do that. I'm going to skip subjects, Brian. I'm going to talk Kevin Durant versus Steph Curry. We kind of missed the timeliness of this kind of meme, trope, whatever news cycle going on in the NBA, which was Kevin Durant really feuding with Draymond Green, but ending up in this bizarre scenario where I was seeing the same stupid effing takes that I saw before Kevin Durant came to the Warriors rehashed. And so for those that don't remember, the Warriors have this amazing season where they win 72 wins, are the greatest, or 73, apologies. They're the greatest regular season team in the NBA. It looks like they're on easy street to an NBA title. They're up 3-1 in the finals, and then they lose to LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers, variety of reasons. During that season, there were all these rumors starting to be floated about how Kevin Durant was going to go to the Warriors. And I saw all of these takes on, well, do we really want to mess with the chemistry? Is Kevin Durant really what we need? Is he really going to fit in? Can he really share the ball with Steph Curry? Now, of course, right after the Warriors lost, they get Kevin Durant, and he's back-to-back finals MVP. So clearly it worked well. And I'm seeing people now in the Warriors because Kevin Durant is on a contract year. I think he's verbally said he wants to resign, but he hasn't written anything down. And if you're a fan of the movie Jerry Maguire, until it's on paper doesn't mean a damn thing. So I've seen people say, you know what, they really should just trade Kevin Durant now and get something for him if he's going to ditch him in the offseason. And I'm seeing it even
trade him. Oh my God, Dre.
Some of that, and then I've seen some even stupider backlash, which is to say, you know what, Kevin Durant is shit on this team. This team is really Steph Curry's team because look, Steph Curry's out and this team's falling apart. It doesn't matter. And what I put on the script for this, Brian, is this is stupid. And what I kind of failed at this metaphor, but I'm going to do it again. So even though I failed with it on Twitter, I'm going to repeat it. I kind of compared it to someone telling me they thought my left Air Jordan shoe was better than my right Air Jordan shoe. And so out of spite, I threw away my left Air Jordan shoe, which even if they were right, that's a stupid thing to do. I also think the logic of Steph Curry got injured this season and the Warriors did worse with him out, ergo he is the more important player, is a really weird take because we've kind of noted this before about replacement level players in the NBA, that if a team looks worse with you off the court or a team looks worse with you out, it may just mean that your backup is worse. And there are a variety of reasons that can happen. We talk about how the NBA in terms of salary and what teams have, it's a stock market. It has nothing to do with the real-time value of a player. If you're a fan of daily fantasy sports, you notice that player values fluctuate day to day vastly. Whereas when a team signs Kevin Durant for $30 million a season, if Kevin Durant breaks his leg tomorrow and doesn't rehab properly, he'll be getting paid $30 million a year next season, probably if he signs a contract. And we'll say he's overpaid. But the reality is his pay isn't what he's worth. It's what he was worth. And so with the Warriors, if they look worse with Steph Curry off the court, I mean, a big reason is they just may not have the proper backup for him. And also, to be fair, he is a really hard player to replace because he is one of the most unique players in NBA history. So on the one hand, it sounds like I'm defending he's better than Kevin Durant, but it's just saying a team not having a good backup plan for one of their stars getting injured does not diminish the value of the other stars on the team. And I'd really call Steph Curry and Kevin Durant 1A players. One might be better than the other, but they're both so close that it doesn't really matter. And you should just want both because both is required to win. At the beginning of the show, when I was talking points over par +3 and noting that the teams that win titles tend to have at least +5 and then more modernly closer to +10, doesn't take hard math to say that means you need multiple stars. So in this weird Steph Curry, Kevin Durant feud that is going on, and it's not a feud with them because it was the Draymond problem. Draymond fighting with Kevin Durant. Draymond's apparently upset that Kevin Durant hasn't committed to re-signing because Draymond was a big proponent getting him signed there. I can also see Draymond Green getting frustrated, rightly so, in that he is a huge part of that Warriors' success, and especially because he's behind Steph Curry and now Kevin Durant, I think he won't get the same credit. This is like Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant with the Bulls. I can see some frustration there, but I'm very confused. Warriors Twitter confuses me, Brian, where the takes they have in response to that is to bash the the back-to-back finals MVP as not mattering to that squad as much as Curry, which is baffling to me.
Yeah, it's very confusing, and they are definitely just overthinking things. So just to get to what we were talking about directly before this, like, good players are really good. The chemistry doesn't really matter as much. And the Warriors have 3, I would say right now, Hall of Famers on their team, right? Durant, Curry, and Iguodala.
I'll give you Clay. I mean, we have this debate about productivity.
No, I'm saying my Hall of Famers, not real life Hall of Famers. If I were in charge of the Hall of Fame.
Okay, Brian. So really, if Clay keeps up his 3-point shooting like he is and like finishes behind Steph Curry and above Ray Allen, would you put him in your Hall of Fame even with his production?
I mean, maybe. We'll have to see. He's playing so poorly this year, though, that I'm really biased against him right now. But I can say for sure that they have. So, because I want to get through this really quickly, actually, to illustrate a point, which is they have for sure 3 Hall of Famers, right? Durant, Iguodala, and Curry. Iguodala is a little bit older, but having 2 is just worse than having 3, no matter who they are, right? That's how good all these guys are. So it's really that simple. Like, people are overthinking chemistry and all that. But to get into the mind of Warriors Twitter a little bit, I don't think it's about I mean, maybe they would say outwardly it's about numbers or analysis or whatever. But I think deep down for them, it's really about old school sports fan type stuff. This is the kind of stuff we'd be talking about on sports talk radio in the 90s or the 80s or whatever, is just that Curry is committed to the franchise long term. He's been there the whole time. So people like that. They like that he's homegrown, even though we think that's stupid. On top of that, he's signed to this massive Supermax long-term deal, so he's going to be there for a long time. So they love him for that. Durant, for the meantime, they think he's a good player, but they see him as a mercenary, just like you said. So that's what it is. I think it's about loyalty, and that's it.
And I think
perceived loyalty, rather, I should say.
I've said this a few times. This may or may not be an article one day, but the idea that we're all marks in sports, and to recap entirely, mark is a term from it's originally from like carnivals, but it's in wrestling. So a mark is someone that is so invested in wrestling they ignore the fact that it's predetermined. And then it comes from Carney days. Back in Carney days, if you found someone that was I heard this from an Al Snow podcast, so this may not be true. So according to Al Snow, on a explanation of it, back in the days, like at carnivals, you would mark people with chalk so that people would know that they were easy to fool in like carnival games. And then that also applies to like
one carny would mark a person at one booth, and then they'd walk around to all the other booths, and the other people would be like, aha, I can see this guy was marked. I didn't know that.
Mark meaning that's what I hope it's true, because it's so cool. If it's not, I'm going to be sad. But a mark being, I've identified you as easy to fool. Then in wrestling being someone who's easy to fool, than in all sports. So what we notice in the NBA is there are all of these popular narratives that if you break them down, don't hold up to scrutiny. The idea of a loyal player, the fact that Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant get the badge of honor for loyalty, when the reality is they wanted to leave. They said, trade me. They said, get rid of me. And their team said no. And then they were with a team their entire career. And then people said, oh, my God, they were so loyal. It's like, no. And to be fair, the same thing is really true with Steph Curry. The reason he's stuck with the Warriors is they've been able to offer him the most money at the time that he wanted. And as a result, he just stuck with them there. So
he was mad about being drafted by the Warriors, Dre. But his dad, former NBA player Del Curry, is an old school guy, I guess. He's like, you're going to play for them, Steph. That's the way the story goes anyway. And then quickly he grew to like them, apparently. But yeah, I mean, and same with Kobe, right? Kobe, didn't he force his way off of Charlotte onto the Lakers?
That was one of the most fascinating NBA stories, in that he did have a team around him really focused on getting him onto a squad. And then there was a lot that had to happen. Vlade Divac getting traded was such a huge part of that contract working out. And a funny one, to get off on a brief history tangent like I want to do, that I haven't written up, that I have to give credit to Kobe. I used to be in this mindset that Kobe for Vlade was a bad trade, because if you looked at Vlade's wins produced with Charlotte, he was a really, really good player. And then Kobe, of course, took 4 or 5 seasons before he turned into a good player. He's actually what we said, he was really more of a developmental player that kind of slowly ramped up, a high schooler, as opposed to a player that got thrown into the fray right away. But what's interesting is, to basically afford Shaquille O'Neal, the Lakers needed to shed contract. And so Kobe facilitated shedding Vlade's contract, because Vlade wasn't a cheap player. So if Kobe had turned into nothing, that's the funny thing. If Kobe had never become Kobe and just been a mediocre draft pick like all the draft picks we see, think I'm trying to think of a good, just like middle of the pack, middle of the road player in the NBA, and I'm struggling because that's how forgettable they are. Not Kyle Korver. Kyle Korver's a good player. Fill in the blank with whoever your favorite player is.
Just average solid shooting guard.
Just some average, not even like solid. Like let's pretend he turned into a, let's say, man, this is really rough. Let's go with Buddy Hield. Let's say Kobe Bryant turns into Buddy Hield. That's fine, because it got them Shaq, and Shaq was such a big deal. So he really is one of the more fascinating players in terms of that. And then where were we coming from there? Where we were talking about. So apologies. Get me back on track, Brian.
There's been too many tangents. Steph versus KD.
Being upset with where he was drafted. So yeah, it was he was drafted in a weird spot. So that's how we're getting back. Like Kobe Bryant's an anomaly. Most of the time, players don't get drafted where they want to be. Curry's no exception. He was injured and beat up, so he signed the only deal, the best deal he was going to get.
Loyalty is bogus. Yeah, absolutely.
There was no loyalty. There was, you have the bet. You've given me the best offer every time, and as a result, I'll take it. So that's what I'm saying is NBA fans are marks. When you see them falling into this feud of, oh my God, Kevin Durant's so disloyal, he's a mercenary. Oh my goodness, Steph Curry is loyal to the franchise. It's their marks.
But it's hard not to be, right? We're conditioned from a young age. Like, we put our babies in the, baby clothes that are of the team colors and all that, and they're watching some of my earliest. It's funny, Dre. I don't think I said this on the show. I think I was talking to someone else about this, but some of my earliest childhood memories of specific historic events are like Super Bowls and football games, So that's what we're conditioned for.
But actually, I've said this a few times this last week on Twitter. I get really upset at analytics nerds like us trying to fix sports. And by that, what I mean is when we talk about making more parity in the NBA doesn't matter. Like that bugs the hell out of me. The fact that people are saying it's a good, I'll throw some shade at him, even though, because I've just complimented a bunch. American Numbers are saying it's a good thing for the NBA if Kevin Durant leaves the Warriors. And my thought is, why the hell is it a good thing? The NBA's most successful periods, including now is like one of the most successful periods of time, are when they have dominant squads and rivalries. When you had the Jazz versus the Bulls back to back, that was when the NBA was its most popular. People weren't pissed off at a lack of parity. And there were like Sports Illustrated articles saying like, are the Bulls too good for the NBA? That was when it was literally its most popular. And then we've seen a resurgence where it's getting close to that. And that's with LeBron James and Steph Curry, bam, bam, rematch. So this narrative of we need to fix the parity in the NBA, or here are ways we need to make the sports better, ignoring what you're saying, which is these are narrative, these are entertainment. And so the ways to actually succeed in sports are to feed the narratives, which is why, for better or for worse, we see sports organizations, media organizations in particular, fueling the fire of these narratives, because they go, it doesn't matter for us if two top SRS squads are playing a best of 20 series for the NBA championship. But in the middle of the season, if a traditional narrative, if Kevin Durant is feuding with a teammate, and what's that going to do to team chemistry, and this other upstart team, this underdog team is coming out of nowhere, we're familiar with those narratives, and it helps to fuel them. So I think you're right, where when we're talking about a lot of this stuff and how it's silly, we should also note that the narratives are ingrained in the sport, and they're a huge reason why they're popular.
I'll be fair, though, to Warriors Twitter. I think here's what they would say, that outwardly, instead of this kind of inward stuff that I'm suspecting is true. And that's about the Warriors offense. And part of the reason why they're so defensive of Steph Curry is because other fan bases will say, well, he's just a system player. If he were to go to some other team, and we know that's not true, right? So the Warriors fan defense to that he's a system player is that Steph is the system, and that they struggle without him, and they don't run the same offense, and that basically right now when he's not playing, it's just Durant ISO is how they win. So that's, I think, they would give a coaching argument about Curry.
All right, I'll take it. Let's go to the best team in the West right now. This is our last subject, the Los Angeles Clippers. I have a few things I just want to comment on this. So Los Angeles Clippers, they don't have the most wins. That is actually the Warriors, but they have the best win-loss record at the moment, like 60-some-odd%. Although, like I said, the Nuggets are technically still the best team. But let's talk about a few reasons why they're really good. And all three of these make me very happy, actually. One is Danilo Gallinari is playing amazingly. And that makes me really happy and really sad. For those that don't remember, Danilo Gallinari was a key piece in the Carmelo Anthony trade with the Denver Nuggets, one of the worst trades in NBA history, because instead of the New York Knicks waiting to just sign Carmelo Anthony in the offseason, they traded a bunch of young assets, including Danilo Gallinari, for Carmelo Anthony. Now, unfortunately, two of those assets, Wilson Chandler, Danilo Gallinari, were really injured. And as a result, we just never, like, we had an addition by subtraction with Melo, which was good, but we never had the, like, over the edge we should have had from that trade. And one of the reasons was Danilo just could not stay healthy, and he is an amazing player. I mean, he's very Dirk Nowitzki-ish in that, he's close to 7 feet, can shoot from everywhere. And if you look at him in 2011 with both the Knicks and the Nuggets, he's mid-level, like almost a star player, looks great. And then if you just notice, he only hits over 2,000 minutes 2 times with the Nuggets, and the second time he hits over 2,000 minutes, his production and position, he's getting played more as a power forward, stupid small ball NBA meme, is getting played more power forward and just looking bad. And then if you look now, his production is the highest it's been in his career on just a raw basis, and he's pretty much getting played as a straight small forward, and he's doing great. So that makes me really happy and really sad, because if he had done that with the Denver Nuggets back in the day, he could have had another deep playoff push. Another big reason they're doing well, albeit in limited minutes, is Boban Marjanovic, who was traded from how many teams has he been through? It was the Spurs originally, right? And then he went to the Pistons, and then he ended up here, if I think that's the full thing. And on a permanent basis, Boban has been one of the top NBA players everywhere he's been. And we really just want him to get freaking minutes. Now, the good news is he already has half as many minutes this season as he had all of last season. So if he gets this, if he keeps up this pace, he'll have twice as many minutes total, which will get him up to about 800. But he'll have like twice as many minutes total as he's ever had, and more minutes than he had as a rookie with the Spurs. He is an amazing player, and I think there are like some defensive concerns and all that, but he is a giant that can just do amazing things when he gets played. And if I had Boban on my team, I would just play him and let him foul out every game. Now, I mean, his personal fouls per minute, he is at 8 personal fouls per 48, which means he is supposed to foul out after 3 quarters. If Boban was in my squad, he fouls out every game, and I don't feel bad.
I agree.
It would be like a baseball comparison. It would be like a pitcher that could guarantee me 8 strikeouts in 4 innings every game, but they'd be at their pitch count after 4. And if you could tell me that, and I knew ahead of time, I'd be like, fan-freaking-tastic, just plan around it, make sure I have a decent bench around it. And, I mean, I think and then that brings us to the last player who's really good as well, Montrezl Harrell. Montrezl Harrell is the best player by far on the Clippers. He is a Dre and Brian star at the moment. Would like to see him get a few more minutes, but there's Boban. So there's an interesting combination, right? You can afford to let them rest. But the funny thing about Montrezl Harrell is he was an above-average player, not quite star level, but above average, that was included in the trade for Chris Paul. So Chris Paul was traded for essentially Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, and I think a few other assets that don't.
Pat Beverly, yeah. He didn't play last year. He was hurt. He's playing average this year. He used to be a much better player.
They got Pat Beverly in that trade. Here's why that's important. This trade could wind up being like the Grant Hill trade back in the day for Ben Wallace. Now, to be fair, I have to keep reiterating this because I was under this impression too until I corrected it. The Ben Wallace for Grant Hill trade wasn't a trade. It was Ben Wallace wanted to leave and wanted to go to the Pistons. Grant Hill wanted to leave. They were basically both entering free agency. And it was a way for the teams to basically trade with no hard feelings while also giving the players as favorable of contracts as they could. So that's not a real trade. It's because, and the reason I'm bringing that up is a subject on the back of my head that I've been researching more and more into and will more in the future is, has there ever been a trade of an NBA star that we would consider a star? So that's the important part, right? It's both as a real star and then a player that we think is valuable too. So, for instance, players like Allen Iverson, Carmelo Anthony don't count, whereas players like Shaquille O'Neal, Moses Malone do. Has a player like that ever moved squads in the midst of when they were still productive? And that been the right maneuver for the team that lost that player, that lost the star? And the answer, and I've started looking over it. I think I found like 50 some odd examples. Some very much like President's Brian, some overlap, like Moses Malone and Ben Wallace are multiple times. But
non-consecutive occasions.
Non-consecutive.
Just like Grover Cleveland. Yep.
But I've been going over them, and some of these were just so laughably bad. It's hilarious, right? Like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I can't even remember the name. The Kareem Abdul-Jabbar trade that took him to Los Angeles is so bafflingly bad. And when you read over these trades, the honest thing you can say to most of these players is who. And so I usually go very much like the NBA title contender point I was making earlier. I go, this is a bad thing because it's never really traditionally worked out. This trade for Chris Paul may actually be to the Los Angeles Clippers. They might have won the trade when all is said and done, because Montrezl Harrell's production, coupled with what else they got, might actually lead me to believe that they got the better end of the deal in that trade, which is remarkable. Admittedly, I will probably always side with the Houston Rockets in saying, if you have a MVP caliber player and a shot at a title, you go for the damn title. I hate the logic of it's either title or bust, but I am in the mindset of, if you believe you actually have a shot at the title, if you don't have to lose a superstar, and at this point in their history, Montrezl Harrell was not a superstar and was like behind, for instance, Clint Capella, Dwight Howard before that. So it's like, if you don't have to give up a star and you can get a chance at a title, you take it. So I'm never going to actually say I think the Houston Rockets were wrong in that trade, but this may be one of the only examples, if not the only example, of a star player being traded where, ignoring injury, I think the team that got rid of the star actually won.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. And I do think it's Montrezl Harrell with the silent L at the end. I'm not 100% sure. We'll have to check that.
God, I'm going to hate myself this show, but let me look.
That's okay. But no, yeah, you're right. He has kind of snuck up this year. Like, we've definitely talked about him in the past. He has a great, adorable Twitter picture, by the way. I don't know if that's his son or nephew or something there. Very cute. But anyway. So, yeah, he's in his 4th year, and he's just gotten better and better every year and has been really good. And I was kind of surprised to see he's listed as a center this year. He's kind of a small guy, kind of an undersized power forward. So I wonder if that's correct, or if they're actually playing him with Boban or with Gortat at all. And I think that's one of the problems the Clippers might have. It seems like they are good enough to make a playoff run this year, but I think they might have this problem that they have these 3 good centers that they can't get on the court all the time. I don't think they play Harrell and Gortat or Marjanovic together that much. But that is good for Gallinari, though. One of the reasons why he's playing so well this year, despite the fact he got moved to small forward, like you said, is he's rebounding much better. So maybe these smaller Clipper teams let Gallinari be more of a factor. I'm not sure.
Well, I think that's always funny in that if you have a mobile player, if you play them smaller, they get much better mismatches, right? So we're saying Gallinari is rebounding better. It could be he's rebounding better because I remember we were talking the great Enes Kanter article you brought up about how he talks about how the way he wins so well at rebounding is he shoves his guy, he gets in position.
That was just a funny article, Dre.
Yeah, but to that point, Gallinari is 6'8", 6'9", close to 7 feet, right? But he's more of a stretchy guy. He's not really bulky. So if he's trying to compete with other power forwards, I could see him having a harder time rebounding. Whereas if he's playing against small forwards, he might not only be able to shove them around like Enes Kanter, he might be able to, outmaneuver them. So it's just one of those where, playing players in the right spot to succeed. I think you're right where they're kind of close in that, you've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I apologize for messing up the name. And it is, by the way, Montrezl Harrell. But, you've got that, Pat Beverly. So you've got a decent 6. I think you're right where they lose a little. And this actually happened to the Spurs as well back in the day with Boban. I don't think you can fully maximize Montrezl Harrell, Boban Marjanovic, and Marcin Gortat, who is having a resurgent season. Those 3 players are doing a lot for their production. I don't think you can really maximize all of them in a playoff rotation. But it's also a decent position to have. I mean, don't forget back in the day, one of the things we noted about I'm trying to remember the player for the backup player. So it was Clint Capella. Who was the backup player on Houston that helped?
They still have him, I think. Nene, right?
It was the other way around. It was on Golden State. Golden State with JaVale McGee just being able to in when you need him. So that could be huge. So the Los Angeles Clippers, I think, have a shot at a playoff run if everything bounces the right way. I don't think the Memphis Grizzlies do. But yeah, I think that's where.
And see, this is why, Dre, looking at the box score numbers are so great here. We're just kind of speculating on their coaching without really knowing what's going on right now. And I'm sure people that do know what's going on are frustrated in that. But look, here's what we can figure out. So Gallinari is second in minutes, right? And he's a small forward, position 3.0. Who's number 1 in minutes? Tobias Harris, right? He is a straight power forward, 4.0, but he has played small forward in the past. So that's clear what they're doing. They're just running those 2 guys out there that are both kind of in between guys that can play either position. and it's giving them both a ton of minutes. So Harris has been okay. He's been above average, but maybe not worth the most minutes on the team. So they could think about going bigger, and getting Harrell in there a little more at power forward. But here's one more thing. You talked about Beverly, Gilgeous-Alexander, and Lou Williams. Those are their 3, 4, and 5th place guys in minutes. All 3 of those players are point guards. So some of them, like Beverly and Williams, aren't playing quite as well as they have in the past. Gilgeous-Alexander is a great rookie. But it's really smart to play those point guards, assuming they, come back to their mean, than playing bad shooting guards. So I like that about what they're doing.
Well, yeah, Eric Gordon is tanking the Rockets right now, so we would rather you play a point guard. And I mean, that's also the funny thing. The small ball meme is you want to increase your perimeter ability with a big that is mobile. Whereas we'd say a funny thing is if you just play multiple point guards that are really good at distributing and then have more traditional bigs, they can keep the floor open and do good things. And the Clippers, at least for now, are. Again,
and let me say one more thing. I noticed they've been playing, this is another tough name, Teodosic a little bit more. He's listed as a 2 guard, but I think he's a guy that can play. Oh, yeah, he can definitely play point guard. Check it out. He's got 10 assists per 48. So they're starting to play him more minutes with other point guards. So they're really just playing a ton of point guards, Dre.
Love it. What time are we at? I want to decide how much time I have.
That's a good question. Yeah, we're probably at around. Yeah, we're just a little bit over an hour right now. Right about an hour.
I'll just throw these out as just kind of quick ones, and I'll let us each get a thought. The World Chess Championship ended in a draw. It does go to overtime, so that's interesting. But it was
Wednesday. This Wednesday
was a best of 12 series. First to 6.5 points wins. Where a draw is worth half a point. So obviously you need to get at least one win. You could draw out and get one win. What is fascinating about today is with a 30-minute time advantage and according to the chess engines, a half a point advantage. And in chess, by the way it's counted is a pawn is worth a point, minor pieces, bishops, and knights are worth 3 points, a rook's worth 5 points, and a queen is worth 10 points. And essentially, you kind of can get a feel. It's not perfect because position matters a lot in chess, but you can get a feel for how much a player is up. And oftentimes, chess engines will equate your position to possibly being up a piece. So they were even on material, but really, really smart computers were saying that Magnus Carlsen was up essentially half of a pawn with a huge time advantage because chess is timed. And in the midst of that, he offered Fabiana Caruana. Is that how you were saying it, Brian?
I've been hearing Caruana lately, but I don't know.
Hopefully that's right. Apologies, I've been messing up names like mad. It's one of my pet peeves, and I've been doing it, so I'll try and be better in the future. But Caruana, he offered a draw, and it made no sense because essentially it's kind of like a weird equation.
Well, Carlsen offered the draw to Caruana, right?
Yeah, so that's the key. And a weird comparison would be, it would almost be like if you were within field goal range in a tie game, in a football game, and instead of trying to get, maybe at like 50 yards, right? So there's no guarantee you'll make the field goal, but you still have time. You've got 2 minutes on the clock.
No chance for your team to lose either by taking it.
As long as you don't throw an interception. So if all you do is do running plays to try and get in better position, or even just take the field goal now, you've got a shot at the win. And if instead of doing that, you just knelt out the clock to go to overtime. That is essentially what happened here. Now, the slight difference is, if we look at the strength of Magnus Carlsen versus Caruana, they are essentially tied. And this World Championship kind of proves it, in that what the numbers in chess would say if you're essentially tied with someone in ratings is you would expect to be 500 against them for eternity. The tiebreaker goes to a faster form of chess, wherein Magnus Carlsen has a much bigger edge, where I'm seeing numbers that say he's a 4-1 favorite to win in those environments.
Oh, I have some numbers on this. Keep talking, Dre. I'll bring it up.
It's funny because for all of our sports talk, we said the chess analysis is like what I wish basketball analysis was, because even with the narratives, the chess analysis at 538 is spot on, because they can say, here's how he was doing at this point. Here's what he did. Here's the mistake he made. Here's what the clock was. They can say everything. I love it. It's beautiful, Brian.
So according to whose article I'm showing here, who we've been talking about him before, Oliver Roeder or Reeder, I don't know how to pronounce his name, sorry. He says the markets have Carlsen at 75%. Elo has Carlsen at 80% of beating Caruana in rapid chess.
And so, like, as a weird comparison, this would be like two teams going at each other in basketball, and then at the end of the game saying, we're going to do a 3-point shooting competition. And so if you're the Warriors against every...
Well, penalty kicks in soccer or, hockey, right? That's really what it's like.
Well, it's a lot like that, but the key distinction I want to make is, in those you might say, oh, well, both teams have players that can score on the penalty kick, right? Both teams have scorers, whereas... This is really saying we're going from one variant of the game that you've been playing where you're deadlocked, and we're going to a different variant of the game where one of you is much better. And maybe penalty kicks equate to that. So maybe I'll give that to you, Brian.
No, I like where you're going with that.
What I would give you is essentially this would be like if the Warriors were told if they tied in a playoff series, they got to do a 3-point shooting competition with your best three 3-point shooters.
Yeah, that we should change to those rules so Steph Curry and Klay Thompson can get in there. But no, back to chess. The chess.com broadcast we were watching had the second-rated American Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura, who's a top 10 caliber guy. He's really, really good. They had him on the post-game show to say what happened, and he basically said, well, he thought he's a little biased, right, as an American teammate, but he said he thought Caruana was better. He said Carlsen was better in games 1 and 12, but then he basically got outplayed for the rest of the 12 games. So,
I thought you were saying he was better in that last game, and I was like, oh, hell no. That's
although according to the graph here, it says Caruana was ahead a little bit at the beginning, but by the time the draw was offered, Carlsen was way ahead.
It was weird because with the time, that is a huge part about chess. There was time pressure. There was this brief spike where Caruana looks a little better. And the way this can work in chess, which is fascinating, is if you get the initiative, if you're attacking, it can be really good for you. And essentially, sometimes a winning strategy, this is what Anatoly Karpov, one of the greatest grandmasters and world champions ever would do. If you could just defend it, you would essentially win in the end game because by getting the initiative, you're initially better if you can find a checkmate. But if you don't find a checkmate, you have changed your position such that once you get to the point where you only have a couple of pieces left on the board, your position is worse and the other player can kind of just win a slow war of attrition with you. So Anatoly Karpov used to be this player that you would have these monumentous attacks on him, and somehow you would think you had him, and he would fend off everything, and then he would just beat you in the end game. And so to that point, Magnus Carlsen in this last game had the initiative. It's possible if Caruana fended him off, he might have been better. But at the point that the game was drawn, that was certainly not the case. I actually do. It's weird because I think reviewing this series, there was one kind of blunder by Magnus Carlsen. There were two potential blunders in this series. And by that, what I mean is there was a move that each player had that was essentially a winning move. And in a key game early in the series, Magnus Carlsen had a move where if he'd moved his rook to the back rank, he basically ended up the equivalent of a bishop, which is key. And that was in the first game of the series. He was in time pressure and he kind of blundered that move and made the wrong move. And just what I was saying, Fabiano was able to fend him off and win. That's a blunder. Fabiano had a blunder in that he had like a mate in 40, where if he made a very non-intuitive move that a computer could find, a supercomputer that analyzes forever could find, he potentially had a win that he didn't see.
And they're saying even the computers had a tough time finding it. They had to take a lot of time. And
so in terms of the outplaying, it's a weird way of saying where I would say I almost feel like Carlsen has been off his game. So I don't know if Fabiano's necessarily outplayed him. Of course, I'm saying this is I'm a horrible chess player. So I'm saying it's a huge chess amateur. But even just looking at the graphs and kind of what has happened. So yeah, the American's biased, but the problem now we have is Magnus Carlsen's in a much different position. And you and I were just talking back and forth where this seemed really odd and we couldn't understand it. The only weird metaphor I've had is poker. So in poker, you play for money as a portion of a prize pool for a championship ring. Like the World Championship of Poker, you get a bracelet, which is key, but you also get a prize pool. The World Chess Championship has that too. It's a 60-40 split, but it's a 45-55 split if they go to overtime. So there might be something about trying to guarantee a little money, but it's only $50,000. So I still don't understand what Carlson was doing here.
It's really interesting. Well, it's so risk adverse. I have a few thoughts on that. So I think the first thing is just kind of an observation about chess. Again, as someone who knows nothing about it as an outsider, from our perspective, there's a lot of really great things they do, right? All the stuff with the AIs and the machine learning is really cool. Studying all these old games, very mathematical in a lot of ways. But there's other side of it where, how brave or beautiful or whatever your play style is, they care about that, right? Like all these GMs went after Carlson for offering this draw, basically saying they just didn't like that he should have shown more strength or something like that. So that's kind of funny to me. But here's a way to look at it, though, that I was thinking about if you're Carlson. So maybe tactically in his approach to the series today, he screwed up and could have been a little more aggressive and not offered the draw. That's one thing. But if you think about his strategy for his approach to the series, it makes a lot of sense. So for one thing, he's like the best defensive player ever, basically, right? He's not a guy who attacks. He's known for his defense. And so if you can just sit back with this insane defense and draw every game, and then go to rapid chess where you're even better than just sitting there defending, it seems like a good strategy.
Yes, Carlson, as I was understood, was at least early in days known as just an amazingly good offensive player.
Oh, maybe.
And what I would give him for this game is, if you were looking from a game 3 perspective, let's say he thinks it's probable to draw with an outside shot of losing, right? Because this is the difference between the NFL playoffs and the NBA playoffs. NFL playoffs, you get one game. So even if you're up a bunch, see the Atlanta Falcons, right? The Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl, right? You're up 3 touchdowns. You can still lose a single game. Whereas if you're in a series where you're the favorite, you're much less likely to lose. So he might have said most probable outcome is a draw. I'm really, I might have a win in my pocket, but if I go to OT, I'm an 80% favorite. And, the numbers pretty much back this. He might have said, I'm just going to up my odds from 65% to 80% right now and avoid the chance that my nerves are shot and I might might blunder. That was maybe his thinking. I can't hate that line of thinking, but then the metaphor, like I said, and this was really from Ben Morrison over at 538, this really did feel like the punting it or, kneeling out the clock when he was up 30 minutes on time control with the inch and saying he was in better position. I'm willing to bet if you went to every single one of those grandmasters talking, they would have taken his position. So that's really the confusing part of this. I mean, this might be the most computerish maneuver he's made, where he's saying, I'm just going to optimize 65% to 80%. That's the correct optimal move. Whereas a lot of us just go, why don't you at least try? And then if you can't get it, offer the draw in 5 or 6 moves.
Yeah, so there's a few other explanations I heard from the chess.com guys. One of which was just sort of like, he realized he was playing bad and he just thought he wasn't good enough to get there. So he was going to cut his losses. That's one. I mean, from the best player in the world, that seems strange to hear, but they were throwing that out there as grandmasters, so that's possible. And another is just that he might have blundered. He might have just not seen how far ahead he was.
Because and to be fair, he wasn't. That's what makes this funny, is that if we were talking like an NBA game, the margin that we're saying half a pawn, that in the middle game of chess means nothing. That is so easy to overcome with position. One of the most common things for expert players to do against weaker players is to just give up a pawn for better position. So, that's a funny one, and I give Hikaru Nakamura, I've loved his analysis. He has gone from the psychological angle of saying Caruana spent too long thinking about this move, and that means he's going to play worse, even though he's better on the board. I could see it being, too, with Carlson just going, yeah, maybe his nerves are frayed, and he just goes, you know what? I know I'm going to win in rapid. Even though I'm ahead right now, I know there's a shot I could lose, especially he might be in a weird position with Caruana's back's against the wall, so he might try something and he might blunder. So, like I said, it was a very robotic move, and it makes me sad that I don't quite understand. I wouldn't give it quite the same thing. For instance, Garry Kasparov threw some major shade. So Kasparov,
yeah,
world chess champion, one of the greatest ever. Like I said, basically, in the world of chess champions, you basically say Kasparov and Anatoly Karpov, and they're your 1-1A.
And Kasparov, Dre, I should also point out before you read his quote, is he was known for being the most intimidating player of all time. That his physical presence and his body language at the board could crush his opponents at times.
You want a funny story? So I need to just pay for this. There's a documentary about Magnus Carlsen when he's really young, because he was a chess prodigy that was one of the youngest GMs and did really well. And so he was in a tournament with Kasparov. And I don't know if I should say Kasparov or Kasparov. I've heard both, so whatever. But Kasparov showed up 30. I think it was an hour. Each player has an hour on the clock or something. Kasparov showed up 30 minutes late. And in this, he's this 13-year-old kid, Magnus Carlsen is. He's a huge fan of Kasparov. And like you're saying,
and the penalty here is just his clock runs, right? That's
it.
Well,
I mean, it's essential. There's a lot. It flows just as we'd say, right? It's just waiting needlessly. It's like a basketball team just waiting 10 seconds before they start the play, saying we don't need the full 24 seconds to score.
Showboating a little bit.
But this intimidating factor. So to that point, Kasparov said, in light of this shocking draw from Magnus in a superior position with more time, I reconsider my evaluation of him being the favorite in Rapids. Tiebreaks require tremendous nerves, and he seems to be losing his. That is some shade thrown. So you're right. And to tie this all together, and then I'll wrap this up. We're not going to talk Creed 2. I saw it, really enjoyed it. Might write an article on it at the Boxscore Geeks, but I'll just tie up chess and we can end the show, Brian. But tying this back to the NBA, this is the stupid narrative stuff we're talking about, where we just kind of went over and said, from a odds perspective, this might be a very plus EV move on Magnus's part, but the narrative it's getting, especially from a lot of chess insiders, is it was a weak move. So who knows?
I hope he did it just to troll them all. That's what I hope.
What I hope. So last point. The way the chess overtime works is I believe it goes 4 rapid games. So a normal chess game, they get, it's weird. They get an hour and a half of time or 2 hours, something like that. And then after move 40, you start adding time back on their clock incrementally. And so that could have also been one reason for Carlsen offering the draw when he did, because I think they're at move 34. And he's like, this guy's in time pressure. So if I offer him a draw now, he'll take it. But in 5 moves, he'll start getting time back and might be less likely to take that draw offer. So that might be it. There's lots of weird narrative stuff, but I'll leave it on the table. So there's that. There are 4 rapid games, which is 25-minute games. So that's much faster. And there's blitz games, which I don't know which time control they use. I believe it's 5 minutes.
I've got it right here. I can say real fast. So 4 rapid games, 25 minutes each, but 10 seconds bonus after each move, so they can drag a little bit. 1 point for win, half point for a draw, just like before. If it's tied after those 4, they will play 2 blitz games, which is a 5-minute clock plus only 3 bonus seconds after each move. If that's tied, they'll play another and so on for up to 5 mini matches or 10 total blitz games. If all of those 2 blitz game matches are tied, they'll play a single game of Armageddon. In this format, white gets 5 minutes, black gets 4 minutes. A draw counts as a win for black.
So what would be amazing is if this series went the distance
to Armageddon.
Won in Armageddon without winning a game. That I would love. That would be the most amazing narrative.
Calling Ben Affleck or whoever else was in that terrible movie. Let's go.
What terrible movie are you talking about?
Armageddon.
That was
Isn't that the movie where there's a fire and a vacuum in outer space? Not very scientifically.
Yes,
reasonable.
Good reference. And then they also have a rush and they go to the Russian space station. That was a perfect metaphor, Brian, but I dropped it. But anyway, we end on chess yet again. If we were going to talk Melo, we snubbed him. That's been the show. I don't really have any shout out beyond Ollie, like you were saying, reader or rotor. Just amazing. Follow him on Twitter for all this. If you've got a shout out, Brian, if not, I'll let that be our show.
Yeah, I've got a real quick one. There's some cool series of charts. I think it's an update. They've done this before. Positive residual points per true shooting attempt versus the Mori rate, which is are you taking good shots or not. So it's really interesting to see who's making a lot of shots by taking bad ones or vice versa. So anyway, I love this kind of stuff. Check it out.
Okay. All right, well, that's been our show. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez. You can find me everywhere as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter. It's Boxscore Brian, and with us in spirit, Patrick Minton, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. We go live most weeks, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or a little later if we have to, like we did this week. But never fear, you can find the recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. And then, of course, we have the podcast version that you can find on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, vote, helps us out. Anyway, that's been our show. Hope your team wins. And if not, maybe they're the Clippers.